She freed the wild horse, but what it did next left her speechless. Ashfall Valley had a silence to it, not the absence of sound, but the presence of a hush, so heavy it settled in your bones. The wind didn't whistle here, it whispered. High on the blackened ridge, a storm-gray mare named Vira stood motionless, her ears twitching. The sun bled molten orange through a haze of volcanic soot, painting the valley below in molten hues. Her hooves, cracked from the summer drought, pressed into dry earth. Far below, her herd grazed sparsely among the gnarled sage and ghost grass, the only thing still stubborn enough to grow in this dying cradle of the world. Vira's father, Coalheart, once a war-hardened stallion feared by predators and poachers alike, stood sentinel at the canyon's edge. His coat was dark and dust-worn, his mane like soot trailing in the breeze. He hadn't spoken, not in the ways wild horses do, for days. Vira felt it too. Something was coming, not a predator, not fire, something stranger. Then the air changed. It came not with a roar, but a low hum, like a tuning fork pressed to the ribs of the world. She jerked her head up. A cloud, no, a mass, rose beyond the canyon. Hornets, thousands, swarming like a wave drawn by something. No, by someone. The herd panicked. Whinnies and pounding hooves shattered the valley's stillness. Mares trampled over roots, foals darted between legs, and the oldest of them, Vira's aunt, heavy with foal, was nearly knocked down in the chaos. Coalheart bellowed once, trying to regain control, but even he turned when the swarm veered toward them. Vira could have run too, but something else caught her eye. Near the base of a dead cedar, dragging itself with stiff, uneven steps, was a horse, or something like it. It moved wrong. Its legs wobbled unnaturally. Its back twitched as if trying to shrug off a burden. But it wasn't burdened, it was consumed. Clumps of gray yak fungus, veined with angry red, clung to its hide like barnacles on drowned driftwood. The swarm pulsed around it, orbiting the grotesque growths. The smell hit Vira's nostrils next. Decay, wet bark, and bitter chemical residue. This wasn't one of theirs. Its eyes were not wild. This was a tamed horse once, abandoned or escaped, now rotting alive under whatever had infested it. She took one step forward. Behind her, Coalheart roared. "Run!" His voice cracked like a thunderclap. "That thing will bring death to us!" But Vira didn't move. The creature collapsed. It wheezed, its flanks rising with labored breath. The hornets buzzed with rage, attacking its eyes, its open sores. It didn't even flinch anymore. It had stopped fighting. Something twisted in Vira's chest. Not pity, not fear. Something older, something wild horses weren't supposed to feel for outsiders. Compassion. She stepped toward it, cautiously, nudging aside stones and ash. The horse turned its head toward her, and for one heart-stopping second, she saw herself in its eyes. Tired, confused, reaching for something long gone. That's when the engines came. A dust devil of noise tore over the ridge. Black trucks with glowing red panels rumbled into the valley, their tires churning up grit and debris. Humans, dressed in yellow hazard suits, spilled out with gear and nets. "Unit 3, on me. The fungal specimen is still active," a voice crackled over a radio. "Keep your eyes open for any viable wilds. We've got permits." But permits? Vira had heard of these raids, teams that claimed to rescue sick animals but always left with more than they came for. Poachers wore cruelty like armor. These ones wore kindness like a mask. She reared back, panic rising. They moved fast. One group surrounded the infected horse, now limp and silent. Another had noticed her. "There, that's wild perfect genetics. Careful, she's spooked." A net whistled through the air. Vira bucked, spun, bolted for the ridge. But the terrain worked against her. Her hooves struck loose shale. She stumbled. Ropes snaked around her legs. She fell hard, the world turning sideways. She screamed, a guttural wail torn from her chest, full of rage and betrayal. Through the blur of dust and panic, she glimpsed the herd retreating into the ravine, the cloud of hornets now dissipating. Coalheart had stopped at the rim. Their eyes met. He did not move. He did not come. That crushed her more than the fall. They loaded her into a truck, her legs bound, her spirit burning. The doors slammed shut. She could hear the humans speaking. 2 rescues in 1 day, said a man with a clean voice and clipped words. The infected one's a tragedy. But this mare? She'll be the centerpiece of our new bloodline program. Think she'll adapt? Doesn't matter. We'll make her. The truck rumbled to life. Vera's ears twitched as the tires ground over the earth. She listened for the wind, but it was gone. That night, deep inside the metal box, as the world jostled around her, Vira dreamed of ash, of soft soil beneath her hooves, of running without boundaries. She awoke to silence and knew the valley would never sound the same again. The first thing Vera noticed was the smell, not of earth or sagebrush, not even of fear, but sterile air, cold steel, and something faintly floral and wrong, like a meadow painted onto a wall. She blinked, light blinding. A white ceiling arched above her, too high to touch but close enough to feel oppressive. Around her, padded walls and reinforced glass. Not a barn, not a stable, a cell. A smooth female voice came from a speaker in the ceiling. Subject 12 is waking. Initiate biometric scan. Red lights swept across her body. Vira flinched, ears twitching. A door hissed open and 3 humans entered. White coats, gloves, no masks. They didn't smell like fear. They smelled like soap and copper. Her cortisol levels are still high, said a tall woman with short silver hair and a clipboard. Let's keep her in observation pod A for now. No sedation unless she shows aggression. Her voice was ice, measured, calm, clinical. Dr. Alina Vorst, director of the Ark Sanctuary, god of this antiseptic world. As they approached, Vera backed into a corner. Her hooves cracked loudly on the floor. She could see herself reflected in the polished walls, a wild creature framed by order. Heart rate elevated, another tech muttered. She's adjusting, Dr. Vorst replied. They always do. Eventually. They moved her after 2 days, down a hallway of soundproof walls and locked doors. At the end, a large enclosure with artificial turf, a small man-made pond, and soft lighting that mimicked dawn. It was beautiful in the way zoos are beautiful, safe, quiet, unnatural. Her pen neighbored another, separated by a low partition. And in that pen stood him, the grotesque horse, the one from the valley. Clean now, but not whole. His coat had patches where no hair grew, only pale skin stretched over ribs. The fungal growths were gone, burned off chemically, but their legacy remained. Pockmarked scars, and a deep, distant stare. He looked at her, and looked away. They were neighbors, strangers, survivors. A week passed. Vira refused their food, refused their tools, refused to lower her guard. Until the girl came. She couldn't have been more than 11. Her hair was the color of worn straw braided down her back. No coat, no gloves, just a faded blue hoodie and jeans too big for her. A canvas satchel hung at her side, stitched with little yellow suns. She didn't speak, she didn't look at the other humans, but when she saw Vera, something changed. She sat on the opposite side of the pen, cross-legged, and pulled out a small sketchbook. Pencil scratches whispered through the silence. Vira watched her warily. The girl flipped the page and turned the pad around. A picture, a rough sketch, of Vera. Storm gray with kind eyes. Underneath, a name scrawled in soft loops. Vera. Vera blinked. The girl smiled, not wide, just soft, like a secret between friends. The girl came every day. The adults ignored her, mostly. One vet called her the mute little ghost, but she didn't seem to care. Her name was Junie. Vera learned that from her drawings, her books, her whispered presence. She never spoke a word, But she saw Vera, not as a case, not as a specimen, as something real, as someone. Over time, Vera let her draw closer. One day, Junie stood by the gate, hand outstretched. Vera stepped forward, slowly, inching. And then their skin met, girl and horse. Not skin to fur, but soul to soul. Something broke open. Across the partition, the scarred stallion stirred for the first time in days. His name was Rotspur, and when he finally spoke to her, through the language of breath, posture, and shared gaze, it wasn't with a voice, but a story. A parade horse once, crowned and painted. He'd worn velvet and gold tassels, walked through streets lined with firecrackers and cheers. But when he grew too old, too slow, too expensive, he'd been left. Abandoned in the wet ruins of an old town where chemicals leaked from rusted pipes. The fungus had come then, silent, patient, like betrayal. They found him when he was already half consumed. "I don't blame them," he seemed to say, "but I don't forget." Vera listened, her ears always forward when he shifted. There was wisdom in his wounds, and grief. They were two remnants, one gutted by poison, the other by separation. It was Reed Mallory who changed everything. He didn't wear white coats or call Vira Subject 12. He wore flannel and jeans and boots that carried mud from somewhere real. His eyes were green and rimmed with crow's feet. He carried a camera like a limb, always resting near his chest. Reed had once been a wildlife tracker, before the Department of Land cleared herds like weeds. Now he works for the sanctuary, unofficially. As a consultant, a watcher, he saw Vera and recognized her. "She's not just a Mustang," he told Vorst, holding up a photograph of a herd long thought scattered. "See the crescent on her shoulder? That bloodline hasn't been confirmed in years. She's part of the Ashfall line. They were nearly wiped out." Vorst's eyes narrowed. "Then she's even more important than I thought." Junie kept coming. Vira began meeting her at the gate each morning. Rotspur watched from a distance, but there was warmth behind his broken gaze now. Junie brought her books. She read aloud in whispers, fairy tales, old legends, some stories about talking horses, and others about girls who had no voice but changed kingdoms. She read them all without speaking. Then came the storm. One of the lab's outer walls buckled under torrential rain. A power failure trapped Junie between gates. Water rose fast, ankle to knee in seconds. A staffer screamed for help. Too late. Vera saw it all from her pen, the way Junie stood frozen, how her eyes widened in terror. The girl couldn't even scream. She couldn't call for help. Vira did. She reared, smashed the partition with her hooves, kicked the emergency gate release with a force born from instinct. The alarm blared. She galloped through the rising water, reached Junie, and stood over her, shielding her with her body as the current crashed against her legs. By the time the humans arrived, Junie was soaked, but safe. Vira didn't move until Junie laid a hand on her cheek. It was the first time the sanctuary saw the wild horse protecting a human, and it wouldn't be the last. After that day, the air changed. Vorst ordered Vira tagged permanently. "She's not just special," she told Reed. "She's foundational. We'll extract viable embryos by the end of the quarter." Reed's hands clenched. "She's not a tool, Alina. She's a legacy that can preserve a species. I thought that's what you cared about." But Reed said nothing. He only looked back toward the pens, toward Vira, and toward the girl who sat beside her now, no longer sketching, just being. Later that night, in the quiet of the archive room, Reed pulled up an old map, one marked with trails and watering holes, the roots of the Ashfall herd, back before the land was fenced and forgotten. He traced the line with a weathered finger. Vera wasn't just any horse. She was a whisper of something ancient. He knew then what had to be done.
It began with a whisper, as most rebellions do. A whispered code from Reed to a technician with too much heart and too little rank. A whispered warning from Rotspor's eyes, something dangerous stirring beneath calm routines. And a whispered truth passed in sketches between Junie and Vera, though neither could speak in words. The Ark Sanctuary had always disguised its prison bars with glass and comfort, but under that smooth surface pulsed something invasive, ambition, the kind that started with care and ended in control. And now Dr. Alina Vorst had drawn the line. The extraction was scheduled. The morning began like any other. Vira woke to the hush of recirculated air, the soft mechanical hum of the sanctuary's systems. Junie was already at the gate, her canvas satchel slung over one shoulder, hair damp from early fog. But she wasn't alone. Two unfamiliar techs stood by the outer doors. They wore sterile blue gloves and carried a wheeled cart. The cart held something gleaming, something that made Vira's chest clench. Syringes, wires, a portable extraction rig. Junie froze. Dr. Vorst's voice crackled through the speaker. Initiate tranquilization. Subject 12 will undergo pre-op testing before oocyte retrieval at noon. Junie turned toward the control panel near the gate. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. Don't, one of the techs barked. Junie didn't flinch. Her hand slammed the button marked open. The pen door unlatched with a hiss. Vira bolted through. Chaos erupted. Alarms howled. Techs screamed. Reed, 3 floors above in the observation wing, grabbed his camera bag and sprinted for the stairs. In the hallway, Junie ran, dodging security staff, leading Vira like a phantom through blind spots and gaps in patrol routes. She knew them all. She'd spent hours sketching this place from memory. Down corridors, past the hydroponics room, through the South Gate tunnel. At the far end of the sanctuary grounds stood Storage Building 4, where Reed had stashed something beneath a false panel in the floor, a crate of gear, ropes, a tranquilizer neutralizer, a keycard, and a trail map marked in fading ink. The map that led back to Ashfall Valley. They made it as far as the southern fence line before the gate system rebooted. A piercing voice echoed from overhead speakers. Security lockdown initiative. Release protocols overridden. Containment breach in progress. Steel barriers slid into place across the access roads. Searchlights flared to life. Get her out, Reed told Junie, panting. I'll hold them. She looked up at him, eyes wild with fear, and shook her head. No, you're just a kid, he whispered. I've already burned bridges, but you, his voice cracked. You're the future she gave me hope for. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded object, a harness woven from silver-grey horsehair. Take this, he said, tying it gently around Vira's neck. Rotspor's gift, so you don't forget who helped you run. He turned and stepped into the path of the oncoming guards. Junie leapt onto Vira's back. The mare reared, let out a furious cry, and charged through underbrush, through steel gates, through uncertainty. Behind them, Reed shouted, and behind Reed, the guards tackled him to the ground. Back inside the sanctuary, in the farthest recovery pen, Rotspur watched the monitors go black. He knew this was the end of his time. His final act wouldn't be to run, but to give her that chance. He turned his head toward the window and watched the night swallow the storm-grey mare. And then, with aching limbs and a soul finally at rest, and didn't get up again. Out in the desert, beneath the blanket of starlight, Junie and Vira pushed on. Junie didn't speak, she hadn't in years. But her tears soaked into Vira's mane. She wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying because she'd heard something inside her break open. And somewhere deep inside, behind walls built by grief and silence, a voice stirred. By sunrise, they reached the canyon rim. Junie slipped from Vira's back, legs wobbling. She pulled out the map, creased, weather-worn and marked with Reed's pen strokes. They were only halfway to Ashfall Valley, and the Ark would come. They spent the next 2 days hiding in ghost ravines and burned-out pine groves. Junie shared dry rations and water from her satchel. Vira grazed on sparse tufts and drank from shallow puddles. Each night they huddled close for warmth, and each night Junie drew. Even without her voice, her pencil told stories of home, of longing, of strength. On the third morning, Vira stopped. Ahead, the land began to change. The soil darkened. The wind carried ash and memory. The trees grew farther apart. And then a whinny. High-pitched, curious. Then another. Stronger. Deeper. Vira stepped onto a ridge and looked down. The herd, dozens of them, black, chestnut, white, running, grazing, whole. At their center, a young stallion with a crescent on his flank, a mark like hers. Her brother, she let out a cry that shook the sky. Below, heads turned, ears twitched, recognition stirred. The young stallion reared and galloped uphill. Vira stood tall, waited, unmoving. When he reached her, they touched noses. One breath, one pulse, one blood. And then the others came. Circle after circle, greeting, reuniting. Vira was home. But she didn't stay. Not yet. She turned back to Junie, who stood small and quiet beneath the trees, her eyes damp. Their eyes met. Vira stepped close, lowered her head, and Junie, trembling, exhausted, transformed, reached out one hand. Her voice cracked. I love you. The first words she had spoken in 5 years. The herd behind them stirred. Wind danced across the valley. And somewhere in the ash and sage, a spirit howled its approval. Behind them, miles away, guards found an empty pen. Only Rotspur's still body remained. His scars told a story, and the sanctuary at last began to question which parts of it they had written. Vira had run for freedom. Now she knew what it meant. Junie had run for silence. Now she knew how to speak. And Reed, shackled but unbowed, knew his plan had worked. The Ark would fall, and the wind, finally, would carry truth. The first dawn in Ashfall Valley came slowly, a golden thread unraveled across the charred hills as the sun climbed through smoke-dappled clouds. Wind moved like breath between the grass blades, old and sacred. And in the stillness of the valley rim, a girl and a mare stood together, both changed, both home. Junie hadn't spoken again after the first words. She didn't need to. Some things were said once and echoed forever. Vira returned to the herd that week. Tentatively at first, circling, sniffing, watching, but the rhythms of the wild were written deep into her bones. Her brother, whom Junie named Thorn, accepted her with a gentle nudge and a low whinny. The others followed. She wasn't the same as when she'd left, but they made room for who she'd become. Junie remained in a nearby ranger station, sheltered by sympathetic locals Reed had once worked with. She kept to herself, her voice still hesitant, like it wasn't yet sure it belonged in the world. But every morning she'd return to the edge of the grazing fields with a satchel of apples and her ever-present sketchbook. And every morning, Vira would find her. Far away, back at the Ark Sanctuary, Dr. Alina Vorst faced scrutiny. The containment breach, initially buried in red tape, had leaked. Reed's quiet rebellion was now a slow-spreading fire. He'd left behind a USB drive containing field reports, unauthorized voice recordings, internal memos detailing animal extractions under false medical pretense. It fell into the right hands. Donations dried up. Board members pulled support. And a team of federal investigators began asking questions Vorst couldn't answer without naming her own ambition. The Ark had been built as a sanctuary. Now it was under review as a facility of detainment. Weeks passed. Vira grew stronger. Her coat gleamed once more in the high sun. Her gait, once stiff from confinement, flowed with the grace of open land. But she didn't forget. She couldn't. She'd dream at night, flashes of fluorescent lights, of steel doors, of the sterile smell of isolation. And always, of Rotspur lying quietly in his pen, his sacrifice wrapped in silence. Sometimes she'd pace the northern edge of the valley where the volcanic rocks gave way to pine brush. She'd stand there alone and listen for echoes. The wind would answer with nothing but memory. And that was enough. Reed returned one cold morning near the edge of autumn. His face was thinner, his beard grown in grayer. He walked with a slight limp and carried no camera this time. Only a woven halter made of ash fiber and horsehair, tied with a red thread. Junie ran to him the moment she saw him. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her forehead to his chest. "I knew you'd get here," she finally whispered. "I had to," he said. "You two saved me." They didn't talk about the time he'd spent in holding, or the bruises, or the hearings, or the words he'd had to say on record. What mattered was that he was free, and Vira was alive. The three of them, the tracker, the girl, the mare, spent the next week mapping the outer reaches of the herd's territory. Reed placed camera traps, logged hoofprints, and made gentle markings on his map, not to claim the land, but to know it, to protect it. Junie, now more comfortable with words, spoke in short bursts, never more than a sentence or two at a time. But her voice, when it came, held no fear, only intent. "Thorn watches me," she told Reed once, pointing toward the stallion. "Not in a bad way. Like he's learning me. Reed grinned. That's trust, hard-earned, worth more than anything you'll ever find in a lab. Then came the letter, typed on cream cardstock, hand-delivered to the ranger station by a courier who wouldn't say much more than, from the new interim director. It was addressed to Reed and Junie. The letter read, "To whom it may concern. We have reviewed the findings left behind by Mr. Mallory and others, and we acknowledge that serious ethical lapses occurred under previous leadership at the Ark Sanctuary. We are initiating a new outreach program, one that connects sanctuary wildlife with the natural world, not confines it from it. We respectfully request your consultation in this effort. We also wish to offer full legal protection for the Mustangs of Ashfall Valley to ensure their territory is recognized and preserved. Thank you for forcing us to remember why we began this work in the first place." Reed folded the letter with shaking hands. Junie clutched it like scripture. The wind outside whistled, not sharply but softly. It was the sound of old wrongs bending, just slightly toward right. That winter, a snowstorm blanketed the valley in silence. But Vira did not huddle with the herd. Instead, she walked to the highest ridge where the ash turned silver beneath the frost. And there she found Junie, bundled in 2 jackets, sketchbook in hand, cheeks red from wind. They stood side by side, watching snowflakes melt on Vira's mane. Junie turned her sketchbook around, a drawing of 2 horses, one scarred, one whole, standing nose to nose beneath a sky littered with stars. Underneath, Rotspur, remembered. Vera leaned forward, pressed her muzzle to the page, and breathed. Years passed. Ashfall Valley became a wildlife preserve, protected by law and monitored by field biologists trained under Reed. A visitor center, small and modest, was built on its western edge, funded by anonymous donations, most traced back to families who had once donated to the Ark and wanted redemption. One wing was named the Rotspur Gallery. In it hung a single photo, Vira, running beneath storm clouds, her hooves lifting ash like thunder. Junie grew taller, quieter, and fiercer. She never stopped sketching, she never stopped listening, and she never forgot the horse who taught her how to speak again. Reed passed away 10 winters later, his boots by the door, his hat resting beside the window. On his final day, he wrote 3 names in his journal: Rotspur, Junie, Vira. Below it, one word: home. Now, when people come to the valley, they don't come for the views. They come for the stories. Of a mare who once stood against a fence, staring down a world that wanted to dissect her. Of a silent girl who broke her own cage without saying a word. Of a broken stallion whose final act was freedom for another. And of a wind that still moves through the valley, carrying whispers of wild hearts and healed spirits.